the greenhouse gas reductions is really happening on a local level. And this is why it is important to include subnational governments. That's why we created, when I went out of office, the R20, which is an environmental organization that specializes specifically in subnational governments and in the power of subnational governments. And it just shows California is a perfect example of that, of what kind of power that we have. I mean, we have made commitments here. We have the strongest environmental laws, which is really so beneficial for the whole United States and also the world. And we did all that because we had a great vision. And it was not easy, because during the time I was governor, during the Bush administration, I remember we had there someone that was the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA in Washington, who claimed that we cannot really control our own destiny when it comes to the environment, because when we talk about reducing greenhouse gases is not really a pollutant. Now think about this for a second. This is the head of the EPA in Washington saying greenhouse gases is not a pollutant, and therefore we do not have the right to really control our own air. And so we had to take them to court. And we went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States said, yes, greenhouse gases is a pollutant. So duh, I mean, how much brain power does it take to figure that one out? I mean, under normal circumstances, I would have done it simpler, and that is I would have just had someone go into a room, turn on a car, and lock that person inside and just see, at what point would he tap out to figure out that, yes, greenhouse gases are a pollutant, So this is the kind of the power that we had. The state of California won against the United States government, and we therefore could control our own air and our own environment. And so we want to let the world know the power that subnational governments have and how much action they can create, and make them also responsible. The cities in the states and the provinces all over the world, make them also responsible to help the United Nations and to help countries around the world achieve their goal. That is what it's all about. So I think that it can be done, but I'm always a very positive guy, because you have to be. Yeah. Because as you know, when you come from sports, and most of my lessons are from sports, and so, in weightlifting, I learned very quickly that the only way that you can lift the weight is if you believe you can lift it. If you go and you have a weightlifting competition and you go out in front of thousands of people and the weight is there 400 pounds, let's say, and you look at it and you say, I can never lift that. It's not going to go up there by itself, trust me. So you got to go and say to yourself, I'm going to lift this weight no matter what. Because this is the only chance you have to really get it over your head. And the same is with the environmental crusade. It's the same thing. You got to go and believe that we can do it, because then we can do it. If people are around there whining, I just came up with a T-shirt that says "Stop whining," because there's people that whine, and they always complain. Well, there's oil companies they're polluting the world, and these car companies are terrible, and this is terrible, and that is terrible. Well, stop whining. Stop whining and go and get off your chair and do something about it. It's all about action. The whining is not going to help you. I don't like when people sit in front of the television and just whine and say, oh, this is terrible and this is terrible. No, go out and do something about it. That's what it's all about. And then we can do it, because it's all people power. It's not government power, it's people power. The way we're going to go and accomplish this whole thing, Klaus, is by people power. Yeah. I mean, it's no different than, the way we created, kind of the situation in South Africa. There was, the anti-apartheid movement. Didn't come from a capital, it came from people power. Our independence, Indians' independence movement came from people power. Our, the right to vote for women came from people power. All of those kind of movements, came from people, not from government and not from capitals. And the same would be, I think, with the environmental movement. It will come from people power and from the ground up, and then also from the United Nations and the agreement that they have worldwide from the top down. And when those two meet, then you have critical mass.
Arnold, I would add here, it's people power, it's top down, bottom up, but it's also innovation power of companies. I feel that the objectives of 2 centigrades can only be achieved if we use all the potential of modern technologies, of the new technologies we have for example, like distributed electricity grids and so on. What would you tell us, the business leaders here?
Well, I
what
think
their responsibility is?
You're absolutely correct, and this is why we pushed here, for instance, in California, always the laws so that to make companies responsible and to go in that direction. I remember when the flat screen TV came out, it used a lot of energy, and then eventually we passed laws to reduce the energy, and then they reduced it down to 20% of what it used to be. And the same is with cars. I mean, look at when you see now electric cars operating and driving on a road that use really very little pollution just when you charge up. In California, very little simply because we have so much renewable energy already. We are almost at 50%. You have an advantage there. But I mean, technology in the end will save us all. And this is why I said always that this is all part of that people movement, because it's government alone is never able to do it by themselves. I've seen that firsthand when I was governor. As government, you can guide and you can lead, but the industries also have to lead, and they have to work together with industries. You have to work together with people, and you have to create laws that get in a certain direction. And we have really done well here, and I think there's a lot of countries around the world that are doing really well with the laws that they pass to create electric cars and to create the technology to reduce energy and all this, because there's so much room for reduction of energy usage. And so I think that the corporate world can do wonders for that. And of course, I think that there's a lot of companies also that are doing really great job in reducing greenhouse gases. As you know, for instance, Apple just came out and they've said that their worldwide operation is now powered by 100% of renewables. So this is really fantastic news. The same is with the Walmart. They just came out and they have the gigaton project where they're going to go and reduce by 2030, I think, 1 billion tons of emission. So these are kind of really great projects and great moves in the private sector that is working together with the public sector. And I think that's the way we're going to get it done.
And that's exactly the philosophy of the World Economic Forum, that the big challenges cannot be solved by governments alone or business alone or civil society alone. We need cooperation.
Right, absolutely.
Now,
and that's why I said that we have to stress the power of subnational governments. Because if governments think that a national government can do it by themselves, it won't happen. And the same is when it comes to communication. I think it is very important that environmentalists and people that want to go in that direction start communicating better about this issue. Because you cannot go and convince people to be part of a movement when you talk always about what will happen down the line. So when you talk about down the line, there will be a rise of sea level. Down the line, there will be melting of icebergs. Down the line, the polar bear will not be able to jump from here to there, and all of this kind of stuff, and the temperatures will increase down the line. The human brain does not really, kind of deal with that down the line of what will happen in 20 years from now that well. So I think that the environmentalists are making a big mistake, and most of the people that communicate about the environment make a huge mistake by always talking about, those kind of issues of what happens in the future. People don't care what happens in the future as much as people care about what happens today. And today is so much happening. When you tell people that today, 9 out of 10 people are breathing polluted air, today, 7 to 9 million people die every year of pollution. That's the day. 20-some thousand people while we are speaking here today, while this conference is going on today. So that is what we need to talk about. Think about 7 to 9 million people, depending if you include, indoor pollution and put together with outdoor pollution. But I mean, these are numbers. We're talking about 3 times as much as HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined, dying from pollution. 15 times as much as all wars in the world. And as all homicides, suicides, and violence, people dying through some form of violence, all come at 15 times as much are dying from pollution. So those are staggering numbers. And then, you hear presidents talk about in the State of the Union address about, the environment. They never mention how many people are dying. They always talk about the polar bear and the iceberg and the this and that, and temperatures rising in the future. But no one talks about today, what is happening today, the amount of people that are dying because of cancer, they're dying because of pollution, is unbelievable. And this is why, again, it is important to communicate the right way, because I know that, I've been on a fitness crusade my whole life. But it was all about learning how to communicate so people get interested in fitness. They thought in the old days when you show a guy on a muscle magazine and with huge muscles that would get people interested. No. That's only for a small percentage of people that are interested in bodybuilding, they want to compete. But the majority of people just want to be fit. So you have to kind of communicate in a different way to get people involved in a fitness crusade. And the same is also with the environmental crusade. We got to communicate differently and talk about the kind of things that are happening today and the amount of people that are dying and suffering and cancer and all of this stuff today because of pollution. That should be our motivating thing, a vehicle, why we should do something about it, and why we should go in another direction, why we should go get off fossil fuels, because fossil fuels kill. That's what we figured out in the last 100 years. They kill. And so the only answer to that is clean energy, green energy. That's where the action is. That's where the future is.
Arnold, we talk about clean energy, but I know particularly this state is very much sometimes suffering from water shortage. Some people would say to me that the water crisis may be the key crisis coming up. How do you feel about it? You have confronted such crises quite often here in this. Isn't this as worrisome as pollution?
Well, what makes it a crisis is only when people don't act. In California, there's a perfect example of that. I mean, we know that every 10 or 15 years we have a drought. So you can prepare for that drought, but they won't. As soon as the drought goes away, a year later, everyone forgets talking about building another dam or some reservoir or something where you can do some water storage or local water storage. I think that we have talked about it. As a matter of fact, my chief of staff is right here. That was my chief of staff for many years, Susan Kennedy in front here. She became kind of the water expert. Susan, you want to get up for a second and just say hi? Yeah, this is Susan Kennedy. But she knows that we have really always negotiated and tried to build, kind of small reservoirs and water storage. Even when people build homes that have their own water storage, like we had when I grew up in Austria, and that the companies have their own water storage, sports places have their own water storage, so you don't have to use the water, the drinking water, and to then recycle water and all this stuff. But as soon as the problem goes away, people don't have that urgency, and so we wait until the next drought. Then we wait until the next drought, and so every time there's a drought, it really devastates people, and then we have to pull back on the amount of water usage and all that stuff. So in California, it's a different thing. We know that we have agriculture. This is one of our top industries that create a lot of money for us, and we will continue thriving and continue promoting the idea of having agriculture in California, even though it's just a big desert land. But so it's all about managing the water the right way. Susan will remember that I tried to fix the levees in California. And so that was one of the first things that I went to the legislators with. I said, look, our levees, we have 2,300 miles of levees in California that deliver water all over the state, the Central Valley and everywhere where there was farming. People don't know that we have more levees and more water canals than Holland has. But they were very fragile, those levees. So an earthquake could wipe them out. So I said, let's strengthen the levees. Let's build and rebuild some of those levees. We need $4.9 billion to do that. The legislators laughed. Then as soon as Katrina happened, they came down to our office and they said, what was this about the levees again? I said, we should rebuild our levees. Hello? And then they said, I think we should do it, and that's when we got the money. And then we could do it. So this is, it's important. You got to go and plan those things way in advance, and you got to create the action and not just stop thinking about it as because it's not urgent, because maybe it takes another 10 years until the next drought comes.
I think what you said contains also another message. The answer to big problems is not always a big solution, but many small solutions taken at the right time, undertaken at the right time.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you use the word, and I know you are synonymous with fitness. How would you actually define fitness, Arnold?
How do I define it?
Yeah.
I think that everyone has obviously their own definition. I think that fit is that when your heart is fit, when your lung is fit, when your body is fit, and your total body I'm talking about is fit, meaning that you can hike, that you can lift, that you can swim, that you can do all-around sports very well. I mean, that's being fit. And we're not talking here about needing to compete or to win championships. That's again for a whole other group of people that use this as a motivation. They compete in the local kind of triathlon and the decathlon and all those kind of competitions. But I think that it should be the goal for everybody to be fit and to exercise every day.
I couldn't agree more with you. But to end our discussion, Arnold, you created a institute, I think it's called, at the Southern California University, the Schwarzenegger Institute. What do you aim at with this? I think you even have some kind of relation with Geneva, with the institute.
That's right.
Could you explain what you aim at with the institute and how we could possibly support you in your undertaking?
Well, Klaus, I expect nothing less.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for thinking about that. But the Schwarzenegger Institute was created together with USC. And we created it in order to continue on some of the projects that we started here in California during the time I was governor. You never can finish everything. It's an ongoing battle, some of those things. Like, for instance, good government, political reform. I'm a big believer in political reform, like we created during the time I was governor. The open primary system that you have now. And also we did the redistricting reform. It took us a long time. We lost 4 or 5 times getting there, but then eventually we won. And like I said, it's always very hard to make those changes, but we did make the changes, and we created an independent redistricting commission to draw the district lines and to draw them fair, so that we have Democrats and Republicans kind of together in some of those districts. And sometimes it's more Democratic, sometimes more Republican. But the way they used to be drawn was to keep the Republicans separate from the Democrats and Democrats separate. And so therefore, in order to win, you had to be on the Democratic side way to the left and on the Republican side way to the right. And so in California, because of redistricting, our legislature, even though there's a majority of Democrats, it functions really well. Because the Democrats have come much more to the center and the Republicans have come more to the center, and those who are not don't win. So those that the Republicans that are doing all this goofy talk, the right-wing talk, can't win in California because the way, the system works. So, people have to be in the center in order to really win here. And this is what the bottom line is, what we try to accomplish. And the same is also with healthcare reform. We were the first ones to really try healthcare reform way before Obama ever tried to do it. And before he came into office, we failed because the Democrats didn't really like me, I think, as a Republican, to have a victory there and to have healthcare reform as a Republican. But I think that we almost were there. And so we want to continue on at the Institute to talk about healthcare reform and how do we go and make sure that every American is insured. So we talk about that. So it's about infrastructure also. It's another passion of mine, to build infrastructure. It's very important. America has fallen way behind when it comes to building infrastructure. And every president always promises that they will build infrastructure, which is so important in order for our economy to really increase in action. It seems to me that no one really understands it that well, and to be passionate about it. I mean, I remember Obama talked about infrastructure, and he asked me to come back to the White House and have meetings with experts that were passionate about infrastructure, including myself, because we in California, we built $60 billion of infrastructure in the times that I was governor. It was, as a matter of fact, a 10-year program. And people want to do it on the national level, but they just can't get their act together of how did they finance it, how did they get the money, how did they do the public-private partnership. And you can see with President Trump now doing the same thing. I have not seen him talk anymore about infrastructure the way he talked about on the campaign trail. So I'm curious about what's going to happen there. But we need it. We in California did it, and our institute deals with that also. What does it take for us as a nation to come together and to build infrastructure? So those are the kind of issues that we are talking about there at the institute. After-school programs is one of my passions also, to create after-school programs. So we have a lot of events there about after-school programs and how do we make sure that the federal government keeps the budget, keeps the $1.2 billion in the budget for after-school programs. So I go back there many times and lobby Congress and the White House to keep the money in there. And we were successful so far to keep it in there through 3 administrations, through the Bush administration, Obama administration, and now the Trump administration. They all wanted to take out the after-school program money, and we went back there and lobbied, and we kept it in so that we can make sure that the children that don't have parents at home in the afternoon, because both of the parents are working, have a place to go to do their homework, to get tutoring, sports and fitness programs and arts and music and all those kind of things, and keep them off the streets. Because when kids go on the streets, they get into trouble. So after-school programs helps kids or helps our neighborhoods, cities and states to reduce juvenile crime, teenage pregnancy, and gets their performance up in education and all those things. So we are also dealing with those issues at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute.
Great admiration for what you are doing, and I hope, Governor Arnold, we can continue this discussion in Davos next January. I think it was so important to have you at this opening session because I feel there were 3 important messages which we got out of this session. First, when you look at an issue, you have to do it in a pragmatic, holistic way, not just concentrating. I mean, you just mentioned how you looked at healthcare infrastructure. I think we want to approach during the next 36 hours the issues in a very holistic way. That's number 1. Number 2, I think we need, if we want to solve the manifold issues in a fractured world, we need passion. We have to be engaged. So I hope you will be engaged very much during the next days. And finally, and here you have been a role model, I think we need a commitment to the public good. That's why we are here for, what we owe to our children and grandchildren. So thank you again, Governor. And,
you're welcome. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I have now the pleasure to introduce Maha, who takes over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Schwab, and thank you so much.